So today I've got something really cool for you to talk about, and it's called Qearn, and it's something that's coming to Qubic soon. A lot of people have been wondering about how are they going to control the control the emissions in Qubic, that trillion supply that's growing every month, and there's a whole plan in place with Qubic, and I've talked about it in other videos, but basically the supply is going to level out the more smart contracts and apps that are released in Qubic, and burns are going to level out with that inflation. That's the whole idea behind Qubic, and it's genius when you start to really understand it. But right now, there's not that many decentralized apps. There's not that many smart contracts running in Qubic, so we just got constant emissions every week, but not burns to balance it out. So then other people have been wondering, like, is there going to be some sort of passive income feature to Qubic? And there is through the IPOs, but just something where you can stake your Qubic and actually earn money. And anyway, this brilliant idea is coming into action on Qubic, and it has to be passed by the quorum yet and voted in, and then there'll be an IPO which will lead to Qubic being burned, and then this is the idea. So I'm just going to read through the idea with you guys. So it says here, Qearn for risk-free yield by locking Q. That's already a great first line, risk-free yield. So introduction. The idea, and we'll discuss whether it's really risk-free in one respect. But anyway, so introduction. So this is from one of the developers that works in Qubic, by the way. But he's a decentralized developer because he's kind of working on his own things, and he develops the Qubic DEX. So the idea for Qearn was first proposed by Mr. Unhappy X and seconded by KYE, and the Qearn channel was created to explore this idea. The basic idea is to allocate some percentage of current emissions for a staking pool, e.g. 100 billion per week. The goal is to reduce the circulating supply while at the same time providing risk-free yield to those that are willing to lock their Q. So basically they're saying 10% of the supply could be given to people who lock up their supply of Qubic. That's going to reduce the number of emissions of Qubic that people can go and sell, because only 900 billion will go to miners then every week. But also because people start staking their Qubics, they're going to lock it up, and it's going to get a yield at the end of the year, and that prevents that reduces the amount of liquidity or the amount of people that have any Qubic to sell, because it's going to be locked up for a year. So after discussing a variety of approaches, the simple one of a weekly auction for 1 year lock seemed to be the best way that allows the natural discovery of what the yield should be, along with the relative simplicity needed for a rapid development. To achieve this, the core code dealing with end-of-epoch coin emissions would need to be changed to allocate 10% to the Qearn. So it means that every week, at the end of the epoch, 10% will be allocated to the Qearn smart contract. Packaging-wise, it could be that the Qearn logic will be merged into Qtool smart contract, or it could be fully implemented in the core or as a new smart contract. Really, these are some implementation details that will not affect the overall power of the concept. So the concept will work, just probably some of these methods would cause more Qubic to be burnt initially. So I'd like to see that method being used. Weekly locking and unlocking. Assuming the proposal is passed, then each week 100 billion Q will become available for a 52-week locking bonus. Everybody that locks their Q for 52 weeks and does not unlock will share proportionally in the 100 billion Q bonus. So the 100 billion every week that is released will be shared equally between all the people who have locked up their Qubic, and after a year they'll get that reward. Adjusted by the unlocking penalty that will be used to burn. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Reward those that do not unlock and partly back to the unlocker as per the table at the end of this article. The yield would not be known until the end of the week's locks are finished. At that point, the minimum yield will be known, as no more locks will be possible for that week's 100 billion. For example, if 800 billion are locked in a week, so if you, me, and loads of other people locked 800 billion Qubic in, and all 800 billion stays locked for the full 52 weeks, they will share the 100 billion for 12.5% yield. Immediately after the locking is done, everybody will know that at least 12.5% will be earned. So once the locking is done straight away, you just know then instantly that 12.5% is going to be earned over the course of those 52 weeks. And that's just depending on if 800 billion's locked. Maybe only 400 billion will, maybe, I don't know, 5 trillion will. So, it'll be a lower yield in that case. In order to minimize risk and allow flexibility, the locked funds can be unlocked at any time, but in that case, a large part of the bonus will be burned. Details in the chart then. So this is great. It doesn't mean that bonus, it's actually better. So if someone unlocks, their part of the bonus is going to be burned, or some of their part of the bonus is going to be burned. So just those Qubic will just go completely out of circulation. Let us continue with the above example and say that over 52 weeks, 300 billion get locked, which will boost yield from 12.5 to 20%. Now, I think a lot more than 300 billion will get locked, and probably a lot more than 800 billion. So I think the yield's probably going to be more like 3 or 4%. Of course, the initial amount locked and the amount that unlocks over the year are unknown, and there needs to be a yield discovery for us to know what the normal yield would be. Keep in mind there is no impermanent loss, as only Q is being locked and the bonus amount is built into the core. So essentially, risk-free Q yield on Q. It could be the market size of 5% is an acceptable Q yield, in which case 2 trillion per week would be locked. So that, that's cool. That's probably more realistic. That about 2 trillion would be locked and taken out, totally out the Qubic supply for people to sell. Or it could even be that only 5 billion would be locked per week to get a 20% yield. Even in that case, it works similar to a halving, as the circulating supply increases at half the rate. Then the circulating supply isn't increasing as much, which I think is quite self-explanatory. When they say this is risk-free, it's risk-free in terms of Q. You're not going to lose your Q. There's no chance of that happening. But obviously, there's the risk that Q could increase a lot in price over that time, and you can't sell your Q at the time. Even though you can unlock from them during that period, if you want, then you'll lose your rewards, and your rewards will be burned instead. So I guess really it's actually, now that I just think about it, it is risk-free, because you can just unlock, not get the yield, but you can just, if you see the market goes crazy and Qubic goes to 100 billion, you can unlock and sell and just give up your rewards. So makes sense all around, really. Burns. So the burning part of the earned bonus will help overall, as all burns do, and it does not harm anybody, as the original locker gets all their funds back and even part of the earned amount, and the minimum yield still increases for everybody else. So I hope that's making sense, is that if someone locks up their Qubic for the whole 52 weeks, they get the full yield, which could be something like 12.5%, as I said here. If they unlock halfway through, they probably only get about 50% of that yield, so they might get 6%, and the other 6.5% will be burned, which is good for the whole Qubic community and good for everyone involved. And to prevent people burning funds by unlocking just for fun, the amount burned would scale up for each epoch it was locked. 1% per week locked would end up at 51% of the earned bonus being burned if after the 51 weeks after the funds are locked. Keep the calculations manageable. The amount earned can be calculated based on the initial minimum yield and scaled by 1% per week held. So if somebody locks and then unlocks before even a week elapses, then 0% will be burned. Going back to the example above, if the average unlock time was 25 weeks for the 300 billion, then 25% of what 300 billion, 800 billion would have earned would be burned over the 52 weeks. So 9.35 or 37 billion Qubic would be burned. So the remaining 500 billion would split the 91.6 billion yield at 18.325%. Circulating supply. Clearly the effect of circulating supply will be dramatic even at the low end of the locking. If we take a 10% yield as a guesstimate for the effect on the yield, that means that each week 1 trillion will be taken out of the circulating supply. But also the circulating supply would increase by 900 billion due to the 100 billion set aside. So this would immediately make circulating supply shrink by 100 billion per epoch. So basically what he's saying is that per epoch, 100 billion would stop existing, and that 1 trillion would be taken out of the total supply during the weekly phases. The supply shock would be very dramatic, as we're not talking about a halving here, but we're going from 1% per week inflation to 0.1 per week deflation. I mean, would that not be that there'd be a 0.9% inflation per week since you're only taking out that 1%? I mean, I don't think it would become deflationary, but it still is an interesting thought. Maybe I'm missing something there. So Quorum, but basically what they're getting at is that people locking up their Qubic is going to reduce the circulating supply, which is going to should increase the price of Qubic. So it's an interesting experiment anyway. Quorum levers and supply. By implementing Qearn functionality along with weekly burn percentage set at 0% for now, Quorum will be able to have fine-tuned control over the circulating supply, adapting to changing market conditions. This also short-circuits the time needed to get the supply equilibrium and buys time for the smart contract to come online to start the first burns from smart contract usage. So the whole idea of this really is firstly to give people a passive income stream that they can have from Qubic, but really just to buy time until we get more smart contracts on the Qubic network, and then we start getting more and more burns happening on the Qubic network, more utilization, and then we're going to see that supply equilibrium happening where there's going to be very little, if no, increase in circulating supply of Qubic. So, it could settle around 100 trillion or 200 trillion Qubic overall. So conclusion, Qearn has a lot of upside with no discernible downsides and fits in with the future plans for emissions control by Quorum. And so when it is the only question, and then there's a lot of notes there. The only question that I have, and I'm a bit unsure of, is where they say that the circulating supply would go to a 0.1% per week deflation. I'm not sure is that entirely true, but 1 trillion would be taken out of circulating supply each week. Okay, I actually think I've misunderstood this. So every week, if you're staking that this amount will be coming out of circulating supply every week. So the whole, that's really cool. I'm only just figuring this out now. So the whole supply would actually start deflating based on this and not inflating, and it would buy time for Qubic to get those smart contracts burns happening online. Guys, I really recommend reading that paragraph over and over because I've just understood that there now, but I probably have to get my head around it properly to really understand it by reading through the whole article. But basically what they're saying is that a whole 1 trillion will be taken out of the circulating supply every week for a yield of 10%. And then since 10% of the emissions would be reduced as well, the whole supply would actually start deflating by 0.1%. That's a really, really cool thing there. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for today. I will see you all on the outside.